The people who laugh at your life today are often the same people who will applaud it tomorrow. Emily Carter read the message twice before setting her phone down on the kitchen counter. Morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of her condominium overlooking downtown Seattle. Below, traffic moved steadily through the city while ferries crossed the distant water beneath a pale blue sky. The message itself had arrived only moments earlier, but it already felt strangely heavy. Not because of what it said, because of who sent it. The invitation came from the Sterling Foundation, one of the most prestigious charitable organizations on the West Coast. Every year, the foundation hosted an exclusive fundraising gala attended by business leaders, investors, politicians, philanthropists, and media figures from across the country. Invitations were difficult to obtain. Attendance alone carried social status. Emily had attended before as a consultant for corporate sponsors, but this year felt different. Her name appeared on the official guest list as an honored contributor. She should have felt proud. Instead, she found herself staring at a second name printed near the bottom of the digital program. Jason Carter, featured keynote speaker. For several seconds, she remained completely still. 3 years. 3 years had passed since the collapse of the marriage that once defined her entire adult life. 3 years since the friends, colleagues, and family members who surrounded Jason quietly chose sides. 3 years since she walked away carrying little more than determination and a painful understanding that not everyone who smiles at your success remains loyal during your struggles. Emily carried her coffee to the living room and sat beside the window. The city stretched endlessly before her. Glass towers reflected sunlight. Construction cranes moved above new buildings. Somewhere within that skyline stood companies she advised, organizations she helped transform, and executives who trusted her judgment. Yet none of those accomplishments prevented an old memory from returning. Jason standing in a crowded room. Jason smiling while introducing someone younger, newer, and more exciting. Jason explaining that people changed. The memory lasted only a moment before Emily pushed it aside. The past had lost much of its power. Still, certain names carried echoes. Her phone vibrated again. This time it was Rachel, one of her closest friends. Emily answered immediately. "Tell me you are not thinking about attending," Rachel said without introduction. Emily laughed softly. "Good morning to you too. I am serious." "You always are." Rachel sighed dramatically. "Emily, that gala is basically a celebration of everything connected to Jason. He is speaking. His girlfriend will be there. Half your old social circle will be there." Emily looked toward the skyline. "I know. Then why even consider it?" The question lingered. Why was she considering it? Logic suggested Rachel was right. Attending would invite uncomfortable conversations and awkward encounters. Some guests would remember the divorce. Others would pretend not to. There would be whispers, assumptions, curious looks. Yet something inside Emily resisted the idea of staying home. "Because I belong there," she said quietly. Silence followed. Then Rachel spoke again, this time more gently. "You do know you do not have to prove anything to anyone." Emily smiled. "That is exactly why I want to go." After ending the call, she walked into her home office. Framed awards lined one wall. Business publications featuring interviews and industry recognition occupied a shelf near the window. A large strategy board covered another wall with plans for upcoming projects. None of it existed 3 years ago. Back then, she lived inside a life designed around someone else's ambitions. Now every achievement belonged entirely to her. Yet remarkably few people from her old world knew any of it. They remembered the woman who disappeared after the divorce. They never bothered learning what happened next. Later that afternoon, Emily attended a leadership meeting at one of her client companies. Executives discussed expansion plans while she guided strategic decisions from the head of a conference table. The meeting lasted nearly 3 hours. By the end, several $1 million in future investments had been approved based largely on recommendations she developed. As participants gathered their documents and prepared to leave, the company's chief executive paused beside her. "Will I see you at the Sterling Gala next month?" he asked. Emily looked surprised. "You are attending?" "Of course." He smiled. Half the city will be there. Emily nodded thoughtfully. Then I suppose I will be there too. The executive grinned. Good. You deserve to be. The words followed her throughout the evening. You deserve to be. Not because of Jason. Not because of the past. Not because she had something to prove. Because she earned her place. That night, Emily opened the official invitation again. The black and gold design looked elegant against the screen. Beneath event details and sponsorship information appeared a confirmation button waiting for her decision. She studied it briefly before pressing accept. The confirmation message appeared instantly. Attendance confirmed. Emily set the phone aside and walked toward the window. City lights shimmered below as darkness settled across Seattle. Somewhere out there, people still remembered her as Jason Carter's former wife. At the gala, many of them would see her again for the first time in years. What none of them realized was that the woman they expected to find no longer existed. 3 years earlier, nobody in Emily Carter's world believed she would recover. The collapse of her marriage happened quietly at first, hidden behind polite smiles, carefully staged photographs, and the illusion that everything was still fine. From the outside, Emily and Jason Carter appeared to have the kind of life people admired. They lived in an elegant home overlooking Lake Washington. They attended charity events, hosted dinner parties, traveled regularly. Friends described them as successful, stable, aspirational. Yet appearances have a way of hiding the truth until the truth no longer wishes to remain hidden. Emily remembered exactly when she realized something had changed. It happened during a fundraising dinner nearly 4 years ago. Jason spent most of the evening across the room speaking with a younger marketing executive named Vanessa Brooks. At first, Emily ignored it. Business conversations were normal. Networking was expected. Jason built much of his career through relationships and public visibility. Yet as the months passed, Vanessa's name appeared more frequently. Meetings became longer. Business trips became more common. Excuses multiplied. Emily tried to dismiss her concerns. She trusted her husband. She trusted the life they had built together. More importantly, she trusted the years they shared. Unfortunately, trust alone cannot save a relationship when only one person is protecting it. One rainy Thursday evening, Jason arrived home later than usual. The house felt unusually quiet. Emily sat in the kitchen reviewing documents for a nonprofit project she had been helping organize. She looked up when he entered. Something about his expression immediately felt unfamiliar. Detached. Resolved. Like someone who had already made a decision before beginning a conversation. We need to talk, he said. 4 words. Simple. Ordinary. Yet Emily would remember them forever. The discussion lasted less than an hour. Jason explained that he was unhappy. He spoke about change. Growth. Different priorities. Different futures. The explanation sounded polished, almost rehearsed. Emily listened in stunned silence. 15 years together reduced to carefully chosen sentences delivered across a kitchen island. She kept waiting for emotion to appear. Regret. Sadness. Doubt. Instead, Jason seemed strangely relieved. As if ending the marriage solved a problem rather than shattered a life. The divorce moved quickly after that. Faster than Emily expected. Faster than she was emotionally prepared for. Within weeks, mutual friends began drifting away. Invitations stopped arriving. Social circles quietly reorganized themselves around Jason. Nobody announced their decision. Nobody openly chose sides. Yet the outcome became obvious. People gravitate toward confidence. Jason projected certainty. Emily carried heartbreak. One attracted support. The other created discomfort. Then came the moment that truly changed everything. Roughly 3 months after the separation, Jason attended a high-profile business event in Seattle. Photos appeared online the next morning. Jason stood smiling beside Vanessa Brooks. Their hands touched casually. Their expressions left little room for interpretation. Comments flooded social media. Congratulations. Support. Excitement. Several people referred to them as a beautiful couple. Others praised Jason for finding happiness again. Emily stared at the photographs from her apartment living room while rain tapped softly against the windows. The relationship itself did not surprise her. Deep down, she already suspected the truth. What hurt was the speed with which everyone accepted the replacement. 15 years disappeared almost overnight. The woman who once hosted holiday gatherings and supported Jason through every stage of his career became an afterthought. Weeks later, the situation became even worse. At a networking reception attended by many familiar faces, Emily arrived hoping to reconnect professionally. Instead, she found herself standing alone near a refreshments table while conversations unfolded around her. Nobody said anything cruel directly. They did not need to. Silence can be just as effective. Across the room, Jason and Vanessa moved comfortably through the crowd, receiving smiles and attention. At one point, Emily overheard someone say, "Honestly, Jason seems happier now." Another person nodded. Some relationships simply run their course. Emily left before the event ended. She sat inside her car for nearly 20 minutes staring through the windshield. Not crying. Not angry. Simply exhausted. The loneliness surprised her most. Losing a marriage was painful. Losing an entire social identity felt devastating. During the months that followed, she sold the house, moved into a smaller apartment, reduced expenses, watched former friends slowly disappear from her life. Holidays became difficult. Weekends became quieter. Some mornings she struggled to recognize the woman staring back from the bathroom mirror. The confidence she once carried seemed to have vanished alongside everything else. Yet, even during the darkest period, something inside her refused to surrender completely. Perhaps it was pride. Perhaps resilience. Perhaps the simple belief that one disappointing chapter should not define an entire life. Whatever the reason, Emily continued moving forward one day at a time. She accepted temporary consulting projects, reconnected with forgotten professional contacts, read business reports late into the night, studied market trends, developed new ideas. Progress arrived slowly, almost invisibly. Looking back years later, she would realize something important. The people who abandoned her after the divorce believed they were witnessing the ending of her story. In reality, they only witnessed the ending of one version of it. While Jason built a new public life surrounded by admiration and attention, Emily quietly disappeared from everyone's expectations. And hidden inside that disappearance was the greatest advantage she would ever have. Because nobody was watching when she began building the future that would eventually leave them speechless. Success rarely arrives with an audience. Most of the time, it grows quietly behind closed doors while the world assumes nothing is happening. The first year after the divorce felt like survival. Emily Carter measured progress in small victories. Paying bills on time. Finishing consulting contracts. Getting through difficult holidays without falling apart. She rented a modest apartment in Seattle and transformed the dining table into a temporary workspace. During the day, she met clients. At night, she studied industry reports long after the city lights outside her windows faded into darkness. Nobody applauded those evenings. Nobody noticed the sacrifices. That was exactly what made them valuable. For the first time in years, every achievement belonged entirely to her. One rainy November morning, nearly 8 months after the divorce became final, Emily attended a business strategy meeting for a struggling technology company. The executive team spent hours debating declining revenue and operational problems. Most participants focused on symptoms. Emily focused on causes. When she finally spoke, she outlined a restructuring plan that addressed issues nobody else had identified. The room grew quiet. Executives exchanged glances. By the end of the meeting, her recommendations had been approved unanimously. 3 months later, the company reported its strongest quarter in years. The chief executive called personally to thank her. Then he referred another client. Then another. Momentum arrived gradually. 1 project became 3. 3 became 7. Soon Emily found herself turning down opportunities she no longer had time to accept. Yet she remained cautious. Success after hardship often feels fragile. She understood how quickly circumstances could change. Instead of celebrating every victory publicly, she reinvested. She hired assistants, expanded services, built systems, created processes. While former friends shared vacation photographs and social updates, Emily quietly built infrastructure. The difference would matter later. By the second year, her consulting firm occupied a small office overlooking Elliott Bay. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the waterfront. Ferries crossed the water below while employees moved through conference rooms carrying reports and presentations. The office was not extravagant. It was efficient, purposeful. Every detail reflected the woman who created it. One afternoon, while reviewing quarterly projections, Emily noticed a familiar name appear in a financial publication left on her desk. Jason Carter. The article celebrated a major business partnership. A photograph showed Jason smiling confidently beside Vanessa Brooks at a corporate event. Years earlier, the image would have ruined her entire day. This time, she simply turned the page and continued working. The reaction surprised even her. Somewhere along the way, the need to monitor Jason's life had disappeared. Not because she forgot what happened. Because her own future had become more interesting than his present. As months passed, Emily's reputation expanded beyond Seattle. Companies from Portland, San Francisco, Denver, and Chicago requested consultations. Conference organizers invited her to speak about organizational growth and strategic leadership. Industry journals published interviews highlighting her ability to identify opportunities others overlooked. She accepted some invitations and declined others. Recognition felt rewarding, but she remained focused on substance rather than visibility. One evening after a conference in Portland, Emily returned to her hotel room and stood beside the window overlooking the city. Her phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from colleagues congratulating her on a presentation that received standing ovations from attendees. She smiled politely while reading them. Then she set the phone aside and ordered room service before reviewing documents for the next day's meetings. That simple choice captured how much she had changed. Validation no longer controlled her decisions. The work itself mattered more. During the third year, her firm experienced a breakthrough. A national retail company facing significant operational challenges hired Emily's team for a major restructuring project. The contract represented the largest opportunity of her career. Success would elevate her company to another level entirely. Failure would be equally visible. Many advisors urged caution. Emily accepted anyway. For 6 months, she worked relentlessly alongside her team. Long flights, early mornings, late nights, endless meetings, detailed analysis. Gradually, the results emerged. Revenue improved. Efficiency increased. Investor confidence returned. The transformation attracted national attention. Business magazines featured case studies examining the strategy behind the turnaround. Industry leaders requested meetings. Competitors attempted to recruit her employees. Emily declined interviews whenever possible and redirected praise toward her team. The approach only increased respect. People noticed leaders who remained grounded during success. One afternoon, nearly 3 years after the divorce, Emily arrived at her office to find a package waiting on her desk. Inside was an invitation to join the National Leadership Advisory Board, an influential organization whose members included chief executives, investors, and policy experts from across the country. Membership was offered by invitation only. Emily read the letter twice before setting it down. The significance was impossible to ignore. Years earlier, she struggled to convince people she deserved a seat at the table. Now some of the most respected leaders in the country were offering one. As evening settled over Seattle, employees gradually left for home. The office grew quiet. Emily remained alone in her corner office, watching sunset colors reflect across the bay. She thought about the apartment dining table where everything began. The lonely nights, the uncertainty, the fear, the determination. Nobody from her former social circle witnessed those moments. They never saw the sacrifices hidden behind the success they would eventually notice. Their absence no longer bothered her. In fact, it became one of her greatest advantages. While they spent years believing her story ended with a divorce, Emily spent those same years writing an entirely different ending. And somewhere beyond the city lights, a new chapter was already waiting for her, one that would soon introduce a man capable of seeing her value long before the rest of the world finally caught up. The people who truly change your life are often the ones who notice your value before the world does. Emily Carter first met Daniel Whitmore on a gray Tuesday morning in San Francisco. The meeting itself seemed ordinary at the time. One of her largest clients had requested emergency assistance after a major acquisition created operational confusion across several divisions. Executives argued. Deadlines slipped. Investors demanded answers. The atmosphere inside the boardroom felt tense long before Emily arrived. She entered carrying a notebook, a tablet, and a quiet confidence earned through years of solving difficult problems. Around the conference table sat senior executives from multiple companies. Among them was Daniel Whitmore. Emily recognized his name immediately. Nearly everyone in business circles did. Daniel had built one of the most influential investment groups in the country. Financial magazines regularly featured his insights. Universities invited him to speak. News organizations analyzed his decisions. Yet, despite his reputation, he appeared remarkably calm compared to everyone else in the room. While executives interrupted one another and defended competing strategies, Daniel simply listened. For nearly an hour, he said very little. Emily observed the discussion carefully before finally speaking. She did not raise her voice. She did not compete for attention. Instead, she walked to the presentation screen and began outlining the root causes behind the company's problems. One by one, she dismantled assumptions that had guided the conversation all morning. She identified inefficiencies hidden beneath surface symptoms. She connected operational failures nobody else realized were related. Gradually, the room grew quiet. Executives stopped arguing. Pens began moving across notebooks. Even Daniel leaned slightly forward in his chair. By the time Emily finished, the entire direction of the meeting had changed. What started as chaos suddenly felt manageable. As participants gathered documents afterward, Daniel approached her. "That was impressive," he said. Emily smiled politely. "Thank you." Most people spend hours describing problems. Daniel extended his hand. "You described solutions." The exchange lasted less than 2 minutes. Emily thought little of it afterward. Successful executives offered compliments frequently. She returned to Seattle and continued managing projects. Yet several weeks later, Daniel contacted her directly. One of his portfolio companies faced strategic challenges during expansion. He wanted her perspective. Emily accepted a consulting engagement expecting a brief assignment. Instead, the project became the beginning of a professional partnership neither anticipated. Over the following year, they worked together on multiple initiatives. Daniel quickly discovered what made Emily different from other consultants. She never chased attention. She never exaggerated accomplishments. She never pretended to know answers she had not earned. If she made a recommendation, it came supported by evidence and analysis. If she disagreed with executives, she did so respectfully but confidently. More importantly, she focused on long-term outcomes rather than short-term applause. Daniel respected that. In an industry often driven by ego, Emily remained grounded. One afternoon after a strategy session in New York, they found themselves sitting near a conference room window overlooking Manhattan. Rain streaked across the glass, while traffic crawled through the streets below. The meeting had ended hours earlier, yet they remained discussing leadership and business decisions. At one point, Daniel asked a simple question. "What made you start your company?" Emily looked toward the city skyline. "Necessity." Daniel waited. She rarely spoke about personal matters. Eventually, she continued. "Sometimes life removes every plan you thought you had. You either create a new one or spend years wishing for the old one back." Daniel studied her expression. There was no bitterness in her voice. No resentment. Just honesty. He respected that even more. Over time, mutual trust developed naturally. They traveled to conferences, participated in board meetings, collaborated on complex projects. Colleagues occasionally assumed there was some hidden reason behind Daniel's confidence in her abilities. The truth was simpler. Emily consistently earned it. By the third year, several companies within Daniel's investment group relied heavily on recommendations developed by Emily and her team. Her reputation continued growing nationwide. Yet, despite increasing recognition, she remained remarkably unchanged. She still arrived early, prepared thoroughly, treated assistants with the same respect she offered chief executives. Daniel noticed everything. One evening following a leadership summit in Chicago, they joined several colleagues for dinner overlooking Lake Michigan. Conversation eventually turned toward personal histories. Various executives shared stories about career failures, unexpected opportunities, and difficult lessons. When someone asked Emily about her own journey, she smiled politely and offered only a brief answer. "I learned that starting over is not the same as losing." The statement lingered in Daniel's mind long after dinner ended. Months later, while reviewing public information connected to an upcoming charity event, Daniel encountered a familiar name: Jason Carter, the keynote speaker scheduled for the Sterling Foundation Gala. Curious, he continued reading. Within minutes, he discovered details connecting Jason to Emily's past. The divorce, the timing, the social history. Daniel sat back quietly. For the first time, pieces of a larger story began fitting together. He finally understood how much Emily had overcome before building the life she enjoyed now. Yet he never mentioned the discovery. He respected her too much to treat her history as gossip. Several days later, during a routine phone call, Emily casually mentioned receiving an invitation to the Sterling Gala. Daniel paused briefly. "Are you planning to attend?" he asked. "I think so." "Good," he replied. "I will be there too." Emily smiled without realizing how significant those words would eventually become. Neither of them knew it yet, but the gala waiting ahead would place her entire journey under a spotlight she never expected. And when that moment arrived, Daniel Whitmore intended to make sure the world finally saw what he had recognized from the very beginning. Some people spend years preparing for a moment without realizing it. The evening of the Sterling Foundation Gala arrived beneath a sky filled with soft spring clouds drifting above downtown Seattle. Long before guests began arriving, preparations were already underway inside the Grand Regency Hotel. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the ballroom with warm golden light. Fresh floral arrangements lined the entrances. Servers moved carefully between tables covered in white linen and polished silver. Large screens displayed the foundation's logo beside images celebrating charitable initiatives funded throughout the year. It was the kind of event people discussed for months afterward. By late afternoon, luxury vehicles began arriving beneath the covered entrance. Executives stepped onto the red carpet. Investors greeted one another with practiced smiles. Local media captured photographs while event organizers coordinated final details. Inside a private suite overlooking the city, Jason Carter adjusted his tie and studied his reflection in the mirror. Tonight mattered to him. As keynote speaker, he would stand before some of the most influential people in the region. His recent business success attracted attention. His public image remained strong. Everything seemed exactly as he wanted. Vanessa Brooks sat nearby reviewing the evening schedule. "You look nervous," she said. Jason laughed. "Not nervous. Focused." Vanessa smiled. "You have given speeches before. Not to a room like this." He glanced toward the skyline outside the window. "Half the city's leadership will be there." Vanessa stood and straightened his jacket. "Then they will hear exactly why you belong there." The compliment pleased him. Confidence came easily when surrounded by people who reinforced it. Across the city, Emily Carter stood in front of her own window watching evening light settle across Elliott Bay. The atmosphere felt remarkably different. No anxiety. No anticipation. Only calm. Her dark emerald gown hung ready nearby. The dress was elegant but understated. She selected it carefully because it reflected exactly how she felt. Comfortable in her own life. Her phone buzzed with a message from Rachel. "Good luck tonight. Try not to embarrass all the wealthy people." Emily laughed softly before replying. "I will do my best." Another message appeared moments later. This one came from Daniel Whitmore. "Looking forward to seeing you there." Emily smiled. The simple message carried an unexpected sense of reassurance. During the past year, Daniel became one of the few people whose presence consistently made difficult situations feel easier. Not because he solved problems for her, because he never treated her as someone who needed saving. As sunset faded beyond the horizon, Emily prepared for the evening ahead. She moved through familiar routines without rushing. By the time her car arrived, city lights had begun reflecting across the water. Traffic flowed steadily toward downtown. The closer she came to the hotel, the more memories attempted to resurface. Old insecurities, old doubts, old fears. She acknowledged them briefly before letting them pass. Those emotions belonged to another version of herself. Meanwhile, inside the Grand Regency Ballroom, guests continued arriving. Conversations filled the room. Laughter echoed between tables. Jason and Vanessa moved comfortably through the crowd greeting donors and business leaders. Several people congratulated Jason on recent achievements. Others praised his upcoming speech. Everything unfolded according to expectation. Then a familiar name appeared on the digital guest registry, displayed near the reception area. Emily Carter. One event coordinator noticed it first. Then another. Word spread quietly among several guests who remembered the divorce years earlier. Some looked surprised. Others appeared curious. A few exchanged knowing glances. One woman remarked softly, "I wonder why she came." Another shrugged. "Maybe she wants closure." The assumptions arrived easily. People often create explanations when they lack information. None of them knew what Emily's life actually looked like now. They only remembered the woman who disappeared. Around 7 o'clock, Emily's car pulled beneath the hotel's covered entrance. The city skyline shimmered behind her as she stepped onto the sidewalk. For a brief moment, she looked toward the towering glass building. Then she smiled and entered. Inside the lobby, guests turned instinctively as she walked through the reception area. Some recognized her immediately. Others needed a second glance. The years had changed her in subtle ways. Not through appearance alone. Through confidence. Through posture. Through the quiet certainty of someone who no longer seeks approval. Emily accepted her event credentials and entered the ballroom. Music drifted through the air. Conversations continued. Crystal glasses reflected light from overhead chandeliers. For several minutes, she moved comfortably through the room greeting familiar faces. Some interactions felt genuine. Others carried traces of surprise. Yet none of it affected her. Then, across the ballroom, Jason saw her. The reaction happened instantly. His smile faded for a fraction of a second before returning. Vanessa followed his gaze. Her expression tightened slightly. Neither expected Emily to actually attend. More importantly, neither expected her to look completely at ease. Several guests nearby noticed the exchange. Curiosity spread quietly. The evening suddenly felt more interesting than before. Emily remained unaware of most of it. She simply accepted a glass of sparkling water and continued speaking with attendees. Yet somewhere else inside the ballroom, event organizers prepared for a special announcement scheduled later that evening. Very few people knew about it. Fewer still understood its significance. And as the gala officially began, nobody in the room realized that before the night ended, one name would completely change the atmosphere inside the Grand Regency Hotel. Sometimes the most revealing moment in a person's life is not when they succeed. It is when someone else succeeds and they cannot understand how. The Sterling Foundation Gala moved into its second hour beneath shimmering chandeliers and soft orchestral music. Hundreds of guests filled the ballroom. Conversations drifted between philanthropy, business, investments, and social events. Waitstaff moved gracefully between tables carrying trays of drinks and appetizers. At first glance, everything appeared perfectly elegant. Yet beneath the polished atmosphere, curiosity continued building. Emily Carter's unexpected appearance had not gone unnoticed. Neither had the fact that she seemed completely comfortable being there. Across the ballroom, Jason Carter watched her while pretending not to. Every time he looked in her direction, he expected to see traces of the woman he remembered after the divorce. Hesitation. Uncertainty. A need for approval. Instead, he found confidence. Emily laughed easily during conversations. She greeted executives without intimidation. She moved through the room as though she belonged there. The realization bothered him more than he cared to admit. Vanessa noticed his distraction almost immediately. "You keep looking over there," she said quietly. Jason forced a smile. "I am not." Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "Of course you are." Before he could respond, another group of guests approached and interrupted the conversation. Yet the observation lingered. Nearby, Emily continued speaking with several nonprofit leaders discussing community investment initiatives. The conversation felt engaging and productive until a familiar voice interrupted. "Emily." She turned and found Jason standing only a few feet away. Vanessa stood beside him. Several nearby guests immediately became interested in their own conversations while secretly listening. Emily smiled politely. "Jason, I did not expect to see you here." His tone sounded pleasant enough. Yet, she recognized the subtle surprise beneath it. "I received an invitation," she replied calmly. "Interesting." Jason glanced around the ballroom. "This event has changed a lot over the years." Emily simply nodded. The conversation could have ended there. It should have ended there. Unfortunately, some people mistake politeness for opportunity. Jason smiled and lowered his voice slightly. "So what are you doing these days?" Emily answered honestly. "Consulting." Vanessa smiled politely. "That sounds nice." The phrase landed exactly as intended. Nice. Not impressive. Not important. Merely nice. Emily recognized the implication immediately. So did several guests standing nearby. Jason continued. "Still working independently?" Emily took a sip of sparkling water before responding. "I own a firm now." "Really?" Jason asked. "How many employees?" The question sounded innocent. Yet Emily understood what he was doing. Some people ask questions to learn. Others ask questions to measure. She answered calmly. "Enough." A few guests exchanged amused glances. Jason laughed softly. "You always were mysterious about business." Vanessa joined the laughter. "Maybe that means she is secretly running the entire economy." Several people chuckled politely. The joke itself was harmless. The intention behind it was not. Years earlier, Emily might have felt embarrassed. She might have searched for explanations or attempted to justify herself. Instead, she smiled. Nothing more. Nothing less. The reaction caught Jason slightly off guard. He expected discomfort. He expected defensiveness. Instead, he found complete composure. One executive standing nearby studied Emily carefully. Another appeared curious. The laughter faded more quickly than Jason anticipated. Moments later, a foundation board member approached and greeted Emily warmly. "There you are," he said. "I have been looking for you." Emily smiled. "Good evening, Robert." The board member shook her hand enthusiastically. "Several sponsors wanted to speak with you before the program begins." Jason's expression shifted subtly. "You know Robert?" The board member looked surprised. "Of course she does." Then he turned toward Emily. "Do not disappear. We need you near the stage later." Before anyone could ask further questions, he moved away. A brief silence followed. Emily noticed Jason's curiosity, but offered no explanation. She did not owe one. Across the ballroom, event staff began making final preparations near the stage. Audio technicians adjusted equipment. Organizers exchanged documents. A large presentation screen illuminated behind the podium. Most guests assumed the program would proceed according to the published schedule. They were wrong. Emily herself remained unaware of several details unfolding behind the scenes. Earlier that week, members of the Foundation's executive committee finalized plans for a special recognition ceremony. The announcement remained confidential. Only a handful of organizers knew exactly what would happen. Meanwhile, another guest had quietly arrived at the hotel. Daniel Whitmore entered through a private entrance connected to a sponsor reception area. Several executives immediately approached him. Investors requested brief conversations. Journalists attempted introductions. Daniel handled the attention politely before scanning the ballroom. His eyes quickly found Emily. From across the room, he noticed the lingering tension surrounding her recent interaction with Jason. He also noticed something else. Emily appeared completely unaffected. A small smile touched his face. That calm confidence was precisely why he respected her. Back near the center of the ballroom, guests gradually returned to conversations. Yet whispers continued spreading. Some wondered why Foundation board members seemed familiar with Emily. Others questioned how she knew so many influential attendees. The assumptions people carried into the evening were beginning to crack. Then the lights dimmed slightly. Conversations softened. Music faded. A master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage and welcomed everyone to the gala. Applause filled the ballroom. Jason adjusted his jacket and prepared mentally for his keynote speech later in the program. Emily took her seat and listened quietly. Daniel remained near the back of the room watching the stage. The audience expected speeches, fundraising announcements, and charitable updates. Nobody expected the surprise waiting just ahead. And as the master of ceremonies smiled toward the crowd and announced a special recognition segment added to the evening's program, the first pieces of a remarkable revelation finally began moving into place. The room became quieter long before anyone understood why. Standing beneath the warm glow of crystal chandeliers, guests turned their attention toward the stage as the master of ceremonies adjusted a stack of notes and smiled toward the audience. The Sterling Foundation Gala followed a predictable schedule every year. Speeches, recognition, fundraising announcements. Tonight, however, something unexpected had been added to the program. Curiosity spread through the ballroom. Conversations softened. Hundreds of eyes focused forward. At one of the center tables, Jason Carter sat comfortably beside Vanessa Brooks. He assumed the recognition segment would honor a major donor or longtime supporter of the foundation. Around him, executives exchanged similar assumptions. Emily Carter remained seated several tables away. She listened politely without giving the moment much thought. Earlier conversations and subtle tension with Jason already occupied enough of her attention. Meanwhile, near the back of the ballroom, Daniel Whitmore stood quietly observing the stage. Unlike most guests, he knew exactly what was about to happen. The master of ceremonies cleared his throat and began speaking. Each year, the Sterling Foundation recognizes an individual whose leadership has created meaningful impact beyond business success alone. This year's honoree has transformed organizations, strengthened communities, and demonstrated extraordinary commitment to helping others succeed. Applause filled the room. Guests nodded approvingly. The description sounded impressive, but broad enough to fit dozens of people attending the gala. The host continued. What makes this individual remarkable is not simply professional achievement. It is the ability to create opportunities for others while remaining largely outside the spotlight. Several executives glanced around the room. Curiosity increased. Jason listened casually while sipping water. Vanessa leaned slightly forward. "Do you know who it is?" she whispered. Jason shook his head. "No idea." On stage, photographs began appearing across large screens positioned throughout the ballroom. Images of corporate campuses, community programs, leadership conferences, educational initiatives. Guests studied them carefully. Some faces appeared familiar. Others did not. The host continued. Over the last 3 years, this leader has advised companies across the country, guided organizational transformations affecting thousands of employees, and helped direct millions of dollars toward community development and educational opportunities. Emily's attention sharpened slightly. Certain details sounded strangely familiar. Around the room, executives exchanged puzzled expressions. Several began whispering. One investor quietly mentioned a name. Another disagreed. Nobody seemed certain. The host smiled as anticipation continued building. Many of you know this person's work. Some of you have benefited directly from their leadership. Yet relatively few know the full story behind these accomplishments. Jason glanced toward the screens again. Something about the presentation felt increasingly significant. Nearby, members of the foundation board watched with knowing smiles. Daniel remained silent. Emily sat perfectly still. Then the host delivered another clue. 3 years ago, This individual rebuilt an entire professional life from the ground up. Through determination, resilience, and exceptional vision, that journey became one of the most inspiring success stories our foundation has ever witnessed. This time Emily felt genuine surprise. Her heart skipped slightly. Around the ballroom, more guests began looking toward her table without fully understanding why. A few executives who worked with her exchanged glances. Recognition slowly appeared across their faces. Jason noticed the movement, but failed to understand it. Not yet. The host paused dramatically. The ballroom became completely silent. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in recognizing this year's Sterling Foundation Leadership Excellence Award recipient. The pause seemed endless. Then came the words nobody expected. Emily Carter. For one extraordinary moment, the room froze. Jason blinked. Vanessa stared toward the stage. Conversation stopped entirely. Several guests looked from the screens to Emily and back again. The connection took only seconds. Then understanding swept through the ballroom like a wave. Emily remained seated briefly, visibly stunned. She never expected this. She certainly never expected it to happen here. Not tonight. Not in front of these people. The host smiled warmly. Emily, would you please join us on stage? Nearby executives immediately began applauding. One table stood first. Then another. Several foundation board members rose to their feet. Applause expanded across the ballroom. Emily slowly stood. The screens behind the stage displayed photographs from projects she spent years building. Community initiatives. Leadership programs. Corporate transformations. None of them featured glamour. None of them sought attention. They simply reflected work. Real work. Meaningful work. As Emily began walking toward the stage, Jason remained motionless. The woman he once viewed as an afterthought now occupied the center of a ballroom filled with influential leaders. More importantly, she earned every second of it. Around him, people continued standing. Investors. Executives. Philanthropists. Community leaders. The applause grew louder with each step Emily took. Vanessa looked stunned. Jason looked something else entirely. Not angry. Not jealous. Simply overwhelmed by a realization arriving years too late. The person he believed would disappear after the divorce had quietly become one of the most respected leaders in the room. Emily reached the stage and accepted the award from foundation executives. Cameras flashed. Applause continued. Yet the evening's most powerful revelation had not happened yet. Because while guests celebrated Emily's achievements, another truth remained hidden. Very few people knew who personally nominated her for the honor. And when that final piece of the story emerged, the reaction throughout the ballroom would become even more unforgettable. Applause continued long after Emily Carter accepted the award. The sound filled every corner of the ballroom, echoing beneath crystal chandeliers and reflecting from polished glass walls. Yet what affected people most was not the award itself. It was the realization that they had underestimated her. For years, many of the guests in attendance believed they understood Emily's story. They remembered the divorce. They remembered her disappearance from social circles. They remembered the assumptions. What they did not remember was that life continues after people stop paying attention. Standing on stage, Emily held the Crystal Award carefully while the audience gradually returned to their seats. The Master of Ceremonies smiled warmly. Emily, before we continue, there is something else our guests should know. Emily looked surprised. This was not part of the information she received earlier. Several members of the foundation board exchanged knowing smiles. Across the room, curiosity immediately returned. The host continued. When our selection committee reviewed nominations this year, one submission stood apart from all the others. It was detailed, thorough, passionate. It documented years of leadership, community impact, mentorship, and professional excellence. Emily listened quietly. She had no idea who submitted the nomination. The host glanced toward the audience. The person responsible for that nomination is here tonight. The ballroom became silent again. Hundreds of eyes searched the room. Jason sat motionless beside Vanessa. Even Daniel appeared mildly uncomfortable with the attention beginning to gather around him. The host smiled. Daniel Whitmore. For a moment, nobody reacted. Then recognition swept across the audience. Heads turned toward the back of the ballroom where Daniel stood. Several guests visibly straightened in their chairs. Others exchanged surprised expressions. Daniel Whitmore was not simply another successful businessman. He was one of the most respected investors and corporate leaders in the country. His endorsement alone carried extraordinary weight. The applause began again, this time directed toward him. Daniel offered a polite nod but remained where he stood. The host continued. Mr. Whitmore's nomination was supported by recommendations from executives, nonprofit leaders, educators, and business organizations across multiple states. The committee's decision was unanimous. Emily looked toward Daniel. For a brief moment, neither said anything. Yet the message was clear. Someone had seen every step of her journey even when she never asked to be noticed. Across the ballroom, Jason felt the atmosphere changing in a way he could not control. Earlier in the evening, he assumed Emily operated a modest consulting practice. Now he watched some of the most influential people in the room celebrate her achievements. Worse still, they were doing so because they genuinely respected her. Not because of publicity. Not because of sympathy. Because she earned it. Vanessa leaned closer. You never told me she knew Daniel Whitmore. Jason stared toward the stage. I did not know. The answer sounded strange even to him. Because it was true. He did not know. He spent years believing he understood Emily. Yet he now realized there were entire chapters of her life he never bothered learning. On stage, the host invited Daniel forward. The audience applauded once more as he approached. Unlike many powerful executives, Daniel moved without seeking attention. He accepted the microphone only after considerable encouragement. The room grew quiet again. I am not here because Emily asked for recognition, Daniel began. In fact, she would probably prefer we move on to the next part of the evening. Laughter rippled gently through the audience. Emily smiled. That observation sounded exactly right. Daniel continued. What impressed me was not her success. Successful people fill rooms like this every day. What impressed me was how she achieved it. The ballroom listened carefully. 3 years ago, many people would have looked at her circumstances and assumed the story was over. Instead, she built something remarkable. She helped organizations grow. She created opportunities for employees and communities. She mentored leaders. She solved problems others could not solve. Most importantly, she did all of it without bitterness. Silence followed. Powerful silence. The kind that arrives when people recognize truth. Daniel looked toward Emily. Character is revealed when life becomes difficult. Emily's character never changed. Her circumstances did. Several guests nodded quietly. Others applauded before he even finished. Near the center of the ballroom, Jason lowered his eyes briefly. For the first time all evening, he stopped thinking about appearances. He stopped thinking about status. Instead, he remembered the woman who supported him during uncertain years. The woman who encouraged his ambitions before anyone else believed in them. The woman he assumed would always remain behind him. Looking back now, he finally understood something painful. Emily had never needed him to become extraordinary. She simply needed the opportunity to become herself. Daniel returned the microphone and stepped away from the stage. As he did, several executives immediately approached foundation representatives asking questions about Emily's work. Others searched their phones for information about her company. Conversations throughout the ballroom changed completely. Earlier whispers centered on her past. Now discussions centered on her accomplishments. Emily noticed the shift but remained calm. Validation felt different when it arrived after years of hard work. She appreciated the respect. Yet, she no longer depended on it. The evening continued moving forward. Speeches remained scheduled. Fundraising announcements still awaited. Jason's keynote presentation would begin soon. Yet, something fundamental had already changed inside the room. The audience no longer viewed Emily Carter as someone's former wife. They viewed her as a leader. And before the night ended, One final moment would make that transformation impossible for anyone to ignore. The most powerful victories rarely sound like victories at all. They sound like peace. The remainder of the evening unfolded beneath an atmosphere completely different from the one that existed only hours earlier. Conversations throughout the ballroom no longer revolved around speculation, assumptions, or memories from the past. They revolved around Emily Carter. Executives approached her table requesting introductions. Foundation members thanked her for community initiatives she had quietly supported. Business leaders discussed partnerships and future opportunities. Everywhere she looked, people seemed eager to learn more about the woman they had spent years overlooking. Yet despite the attention, Emily remained exactly the same. She smiled, listened, thanked people graciously. Nothing about her behavior suggested someone trying to prove a point. That quiet confidence impressed people even more than the award itself. Later in the evening, Jason Carter delivered his keynote speech. The presentation went well. The audience applauded politely. Several guests complimented his remarks afterward. Yet, something felt different. For the first time in many years, he found himself standing in a room where he was no longer the center of attention. Surprisingly, the realization did not create resentment. It created perspective. As the gala gradually moved toward its conclusion, guests began gathering in smaller groups throughout the ballroom. Some exchanged business cards. Others discussed future projects. Near one of the large windows overlooking the city, Emily stood quietly admiring the lights of Seattle shimmering against the night sky. The award rested safely inside a presentation case nearby. For a few peaceful moments, she finally found silence. Then a familiar voice spoke behind her. Emily. She turned. Jason stood several feet away. Alone. There was no audience. No crowd. No performance. Just two people sharing a conversation neither could have imagined years earlier. Emily smiled politely. Jason. For a moment, neither spoke. The city lights reflected across the glass behind them. Music drifted softly from the ballroom. Finally, Jason exhaled slowly. I owe you an apology. Emily listened without interruption. There were a lot of things I did not understand, he continued. And a lot of things I should have appreciated more. The honesty surprised even him. Throughout the evening, he had replayed memories he had not considered in years. The support Emily provided during difficult stages of his career. The sacrifices she made. The encouragement she offered. Somewhere along the way, he stopped noticing those things. Emily remained calm. Life teaches all of us eventually, she said gently. Jason nodded. I suppose it does. Another silence followed. Not uncomfortable. Just honest. The kind that appears when two people finally stop arguing with reality. Jason looked toward the ballroom where guests continued congratulating foundation leaders and sponsors. You have done incredibly well. Emily smiled. Thank you. I mean it. She believed him. Surprisingly, that mattered less than she once imagined it would. Years earlier, hearing those words might have felt like victory. Tonight they felt like closure. There was a difference. Jason glanced toward the presentation case containing her award. You know, when everything ended, I thought I understood how your story would go. Emily laughed softly. That makes two of us. Jason smiled for the first time. A genuine smile. Clearly neither of us was right. Before either could continue, another familiar figure approached. Daniel Whitmore. He carried himself with the same calm professionalism he displayed throughout the evening. Jason immediately straightened. Daniel extended his hand. Good evening. Jason shook it. Good evening. The exchange remained courteous and brief. Yet the contrast was impossible to miss. Years earlier, Jason believed Emily's future depended on remaining part of his world. Now she stood beside one of the most respected leaders in the country, not because she needed someone powerful beside her, but because she earned the respect of people who recognized her value. Daniel turned toward Emily. Ready to go? Emily glanced around the ballroom one final time. She looked at the stage. The guests. The city lights beyond the windows. 3 years earlier, she entered a different season of life carrying heartbreak, uncertainty, and the painful belief that everything important had been left behind. Standing here now, she realized how wrong that belief had been. Sometimes losing one version of your future creates space for a better one. She nodded. Yes. Together, she and Daniel began walking toward the exit. Guests continued offering congratulations as they passed. Some requested future meetings. Others simply expressed admiration. Emily thanked each person warmly. Yet her attention remained focused elsewhere. On peace. On gratitude. On the life she built one difficult day at a time. Outside, the night air felt cool and refreshing. The city stretched endlessly before them, illuminated by thousands of lights reflecting across Elliott Bay. Cameras flashed near the entrance as guests departed. Traffic moved steadily through downtown streets. The world continued exactly as it always had. Yet everything felt different. Emily paused briefly before entering her car. Behind her, the gala continued. Applause still echoed faintly from inside the hotel. Once, she might have believed that applause represented the ending she wanted. Now she understood something better. The real victory happened long before anyone stood and clapped. It happened during lonely nights when she refused to quit. During difficult mornings when she chose to keep going. During years when nobody watched. As the car pulled away from the hotel, Emily glanced once more at the skyline beyond the window and smiled. She had not returned to prove anyone wrong. She had returned as the person she was always capable of becoming. And in the end, she did not win back approval. She won something far more valuable. Herself.